Hello everybody, this is a review of the Hobbymate BLHeli 15 amp ESC. It can handle 2 to 4S LiPos. It can handle a constant current draw of 15 amps, a burst current draw of 25 amps. It weighs approximately 6 grams with these lead wires, approximately 4 grams for only the board only. The dimensions are approximately 23 millimeters long by 12 millimeters wide by about 3 millimeters thick. You get an idea of what size that is here. This is a very small, compact ESC. It has an Amtel processor on it. This is fully configurable through BLHeli Suite, utilizing the Cleanflight pass-through through your flight controller. It's very simple to set up. It has one-shot 125 support and also support for damped light. Damped light comes turned on out of the box. This is a great size ESC for 1806 motors or 2204 motors, 2205 motors that you would use to build up to a 250 size quad. So I'm going to be using this 15 amp ESC as part of a build. Of a QAV 210. I got this carbon fiber frame from Target Hobby. It has a 3 millimeter base plate, has 1.5 millimeter top plate. I have one of these. I have exact one of these frames from another build that had 2204 motors on. The frame is held up fantastic. I'm really happy with how it's performed. It's very stiff. It's my daily flyer. For motors on this build, I'm going to use these Hobbymate 2205 2300 kV motors I picked up from Amazon a few weeks back. I did some testing on the thrust stand with these. They performed really nicely. They got really smooth bearings. They're very tight. They got nice wires on them. Considering that these are 15 amp ESCs, the thrust stand results on these 2205 motors showed that about a 50-45 bullnose prop was ideal to use. These drew about 18 amps and produced about 860 grams of thrust. 18 amps will be actually less than that in the air because that was on a static thrust stand. Dynamically in the air, you'll see about 20% less amp pull than that, so 15 amp ESCs will work perfect. And plus, remember, these are rated up to 25 amp burst for short periods of time. For the flight controller, I'm using a Seriously Pro F3. Connecting up to that, I have a standard 6-channel receiver. Already have the flight control wires on here, ready to go. For the power distribution board that I'll be connecting up to the ESCs and the rest of the electrical connections, I got this from Hobbymate. It's a 5-in-1 power distribution board. You bring main power in here. Already got a pigtail hooked up to it. I hooked this up already. I did some testing on this also for Amazon. It's got 4 ESC outputs, one on each corner. It has both 5-volt and 12-volt regulated outputs. It's a 5-in-1 because it has some extra features that you normally don't find on a power distribution board. So it's got a low voltage alarm here that sounds through this buzzer. You can either select 3.4, 3.5, or 3.6 volts per cell as a threshold for the alarm, and you can switch which one you want using this switch. Also, a function you don't normally find on power distribution boards, because it has the buzzer, you can hook this up to an auxiliary channel and it serves as a lost model function. So if you lose your quadcopter in high weeds or tall grass, you can flip a switch, you hook up to your auxiliary channel, and it will sound this buzzer, and it makes it a lot easier to find. If you hook that up to a 3-way switch, in fact, you can flip it to the other position, and it has LEDs that you can turn on and off via that switch. It has 4 different LED pads on here. You have one here, one here, one here, and one here. So you can turn on your headlights, your tail lights, or running lights on your quad. It's actually a really nice power distribution board. For the FPV system, I'm going to use one of these 1000 TVL cameras. This is a CCD. For the video transmitter, this is a 200 milliwatt transmitter. I like 200 milliwatts the best. If you get anything higher than 200 milliwatts, next step up is essentially 600 milliwatts. If you're flying around anybody else, it causes them a lot of problems. It's just too strong to fly around other people. One of the things you have to watch out for on these transmitters is that there's two different types of connectors they have on the end. There's SMA and RP SMA. This is an RP, stands for reverse polarity SMA. It's got a pin here in the middle. That's how you can tell what kind it is. A SMA connector won't have that pin. Of course, it has to connect up to your antenna properly. You can see that that mates properly on there. I also have an extension, an RP SMA extension. This is useful in some cases if you want to mount your transmitter underneath through this hole that this is designed for. So what you have here are all the parts to put together a basic FPV quadcopter. None of this is difficult. People new to the hobby shouldn't be intimidated by this. You have a little bit of soldering to do to hook up the ESCs to the power distribution board, and then to solder your motors to your ESC leads. There's a little bit of soldering involved by tapping into the power for if you want to utilize the 5 volt or 12 volt output, which I will. For your FPV equipment, there's a little bit of soldering to do on the board. It's not difficult. The rest of the connections are all plug and play. Connections from your receiver to your flight control board, and connections from your ESCs to your flight control board. It's all very simple. There's a lot of videos on YouTube to show you exactly how to do it, and we'll put together this here in a little bit and see how it works and flies. Alright, I just finished with the build, so let's see how it worked out. Here at the bottom, I have the Hobbymate power distribution board. I have all 4 ESCs wired up to it. Off the 12 volt supply of the board, I'm running my video transmitter and my camera. Also on this board, I have it hooked up to my gear channel on my receiver. That way, if I flip a switch, remembering that this has the lost model function. You also see on this board, there's this little switch right here. And right here there's some little LEDs, and you can select the low voltage threshold. There's a little buzzer in here that sounds when you get down to that selected low voltage threshold. Taking a look around the rest of the board, I obviously got the battery hooked up right here. And that's about it for the power distribution board. Now above the power distribution board, I got my flight controller. It's hooked up to my receiver. Got it hooked up through pulse width modulated. For the ESCs, I trimmed the motor wires back a little bit and soldered the motor leads directly to the ESC pads. Of course, I took off the ESC wires to be able to do that. You don't have to do that. You can go ahead and solder the motor leads directly to the ESC wires. This just shortens them up a little bit. So the next step is to go ahead and hook it up to Cleanflight and the BLHeli suite and do all the programming. So let's go over to the computer. Okay, here we are in front of the computer. The first time you plug in your flight control board to the computer, it's going to install some drivers. So let's plug in the USB port. And so you see here this UART bridge, COM3. The COM channel, which is really a serial channel, on your computer may be slightly different, but you want to note this. This will show up under devices after it installs the drivers. So we see COM3 here. So next we'll open up Cleanflight. Starting up Cleanflight, the first thing you can do, if you've never connected your flight control to Cleanflight before, you can flash a firmware. So what you would do, without connecting, I haven't connected yet, you can choose the board that you have. In my case, I've got the SP Racing F3, and you can choose the latest firmware. At this time it's version 1.13.0. Then you would go down here and you would load firmware online, and then you would click flash firmware. But I'm not going to do that because I've already got the latest firmware loaded on my board. But if you wanted to load it on yours, that's what you would do. And it would take about a minute or so for it to load. After you get done with that, you'd be ready to connect into Cleanflight. So we go back to the welcome screen. We would select the COM port that we saw earlier. Mine selected as COM 3. And we would hit connect. Now under the setup page, you'll see that your quadcopter is reacting to movement. What you can do here, really the only thing you need to do on this page, is to calibrate the accelerometer. So we hit calibrate here, and it calibrates it. It's fairly straightforward. Moving on to the next tab, there's nothing you should have to configure in the ports tab. So on the configuration tab, you'll see that you have a picture of your quad here, and it shows the motor directions. The features I like to turn on in here are motor stop. That means that it does not spin the motors when the quad is armed. I like to select one shot, 125. These throttle settings are important for the Hobbymate 15 amp BLHeli ESCs because they have an Amtel processor. You want to set your minimum throttle typically in the 1050 range. You don't have to change the middle throttle position. Your maximum throttle, you want to increase that up to about 2000. I think it defaults at close to 1800. And your minimum command, you want to decrease to about 920. As we move down through here, you have your receiver mode configuration. I do have mine set up in pulse width modulated mode. Also down here, the only other thing that I changed was because I'm using the Hobbymate 5-in-1 power distribution board that I have hooked up to my auxiliary channel to be able to sound the lost model alarm. I have to turn on this servo tilt function. Once that's complete, you want to save and reboot. Moving on to the next tab, you do want to engage failsafe. And in this case, I have it engage the failsafe procedure to land. I have it doing you select a particular throttle here. This is typically a low throttle value. I've selected 1150, and that will turn on the motors for a value of 100 here, which we see a value of 1 equals a tenth of a second, so a value of 100 equals 10 seconds. So if it loses signal, it'll spin the motors at 1150 on the throttle setting for a time of 10 seconds. Once you change that, you hit save and reboot. And you go into P&ID tuning. I like to select Lux Float here, and I select these P&IDs. These are ones that have worked out pretty good for me in the past. I do increase the roll rate, pitch rate, and yaw rate slightly from what comes default. As you change these, you would hit save. The next tab is the receiver tab. Now for this, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my transmitter and plug in a battery to my quadcopter. Now you definitely want to have the props off when you do any of this. So here you can see that it's properly configured. As I move the gimbals around, you can see it changing. You can see I got my flight mode configured here. This is my three-way switch on auxiliary 2, and on my gear channel, which is assigned to auxiliary 1, that is the lost model beeper off of the Hobbymate 5-in-1 power distribution board. You can hear that's very loud. Also on this screen, you have your throttle mids and their throttle expo. I don't change these typically, but what I do change is the RC rate and the RC expo slightly. The higher number you make the RC rate, the more sensitive your sticks will be. So we would save that. And moving on to modes. Here's where you set up how your flight control switch is going to change. So here you see if I flip my three-way switch, that is, I have it set up for angle mode at one position, and then it goes into horizon mode in the middle position, and the very last position where neither one of these selected, this is acro mode. So that's the only modes I need to select on the screen. We don't need to change anything for adjustments, servo, GPS. We're going to move straight down to motors. So here it is absolutely essential that you don't have your props on. So what we're going to do here is check the rotation of our motors. You can see this diagram here. It tells us which way they should be turning, because we'll likely have to change a couple of them. And so what we can do here is, assuming props are off, the battery is connected, we can turn on the motor test, and we can spin each motor individually. So I'm going to spin this number one motor here by slowly raising that and check the direction of the motor. Now I can see right now mine's turning the wrong direction. So I'll remember I want to reverse the direction on the first motor. Now let me check the number two motor. It's spinning the right direction. Number three is spinning correct direction. Number four, spinning the wrong direction. So I have to change the direction on motors 1 and 4. While we're here, we can also sync the ESCs. So to do that, we will unplug our battery. We will raise this all the way. We will plug back in the battery and listen to tones. Now when it plays that last tone, you lower it. And when it plays that last tone, we have now synced the motors and set the span for the throttle. So now we're ready to go over to BLHeli Suite. So we'll disconnect and open up BLHeli Suite. So the first thing we need to do is download BLHeli Suite. The very first search return in Google will come to this site right here. Open it up, click download BLHeli Suite. It'll take you to the latest version. Go ahead and save and extract the zip file to your hard drive. Then, once done, you can open up the BLHeli Suite executable. Okay, here the first thing you need to do is connect your flight control board and your quad to the COM port. So we also have to have the battery plugged in, so we'll do that too. Okay, now we need to select the right interface. We want to use this very last one, the Amtel BLHeli ESC bootloader for Cleanflight. Select that. Then we make sure we have the right COM port selected. I have COM3, that's correct. I hit connect. Then I hit this check button and I'll read all the ESCs. So you can see that it read all 4 ESCs correctly. So now we see the Hobbymate 15 amp ESCs have BLHeli revision 14.4. And these are all the settings that come as default. So really the only thing we need to change here is that we remember that I needed to change the direction on ESCs 1 and 4. So I will go down here and deselect all these ESCs except for 1. I will read the setup for 1 and it says it has normal motor direction. I will change that and I will hit right setup. Okay, now I will select ESC number 4. I will read setup and I will change the direction for ESC 4. I will write it. Now I'll hit check all of them again. Read them all successfully. Then I can go to this ESC Overview tab, and it shows me all the settings for all the ESCs at once. We can see that only ESC 1 and 4 are reversed, whereas ESCs 2 and 3 are normal. I can go back to the Setup tab. We also notice here that this has our min throttle and our max throttles in here. This is what we set in Cleanflight when we synced the ESCs. There's a couple other settings in here that we might note. Is that we know that these ESCs come with damped light. We see that that is turned on by default. I wouldn't change that. One of the things that you may consider changing is the motor timing. If your motors require different timing, you can change it here. Some of the options are low, medium low, medium is the default, medium high, and high. For the Hobbymate 2205 motors, medium should work just fine. Other than that, you probably won't have to change any of the other settings. Now if you want to update the BLHeli firmware to the latest version, you would use this flash BLHeli button. We never want to change this. We always want to use the Blue Series 12A firmware. What we would do here, we see our current firmware version is again 1.4.4. We could select the very latest by default, and we hit OK, and that would update that to version 1.4.7. So let's do that. So I'm going to flash ESC number 1. Hit OK. Now it's writing the flash. Okay, so this was done successfully. Okay, so now it's asking if we want to write the current settings to the ESC1, and we do. It automatically goes to the next ESC to flash the firmware. So we would hit OK. We would update the firmware, and we would do this for each one of the 4 ESCs. Okay, now we'll go back to the ESC overview, and we'll see that all of them are updated to 14.7 firmware, and we still have the same min and max throttle positions. So that's it. We're finished with everything, and we're ready to take our quadcopter out for a flight. Alright, here we are at the local park. Got everything ready to go. So let's give this a try. Nice and stable. Let's do a little speed controls. Seem very responsive. Alright, see what this can do. That's pretty impressive. Very good punch out. Let's try that again. That is incredible. Let's try a few speed runs. Very nice. Very nice. That is incredibly fast. I really like this setup. Very stable. All right. All right, let's feel the motors and the speed controls. Motors are not hot at all. Speed controls are cool too. I'm very happy with this. Good job, Target Hobby. You did it again. Very nice speed controls, and I like these 2205 motors also. Very nice.